Mr. Williams, you are recognized.
Members, I rise in reluctant opposition to this bill. Reluctant because I respect the authors and what they are trying to accomplish. First, I want to remark that nothing in this bill, passing it or not passing it, interferes with what the choices that people will make. People will make choices. They are free. The question is whether we as the state of California ratify that choice and endorse that choice to take one's life. And I could agree that there is a point of suffering that we want to allow people and to endorse people to avoid. But that is not the criteria in this bill. This bill is not based on people being able to qualify once they are in pain. It is not based on even people facing pain around the corner. That is not the criteria in this bill. The criteria in the bill is anyone qualifies if two doctors say they have a 6-month diagnosis. Well, 6-month diagnoses are wrong much of the time. And that means, statistically, 12% of people would live longer than that 6 months, some of them for many years. And just so that you don't think that the story from our colleague from Compton is rare, I was approached by a fellow just randomly at the Democratic picnic on Monday about this very matter. He said, "Das, please, I want to encourage you not to support this bill. My uncle, a young man, was diagnosed. He was sad. He was depressed. He would have taken his own life, and we would have given him the means to do that and ratified it by society. Instead, he managed to make it through, live a good quality of life, and raise his daughter. He eventually passed away 4.5 years later. But that was 4 years that made a difference, members. And we do not want to deny 12% of those populations that extra time, especially if they are not facing symptoms at all. Members, if we endorse this for people who are not facing symptoms, then we are endorsing people taking one's life for reasons other than pain. What would those reasons be? Fear of the diagnosis? Sadness? Depression? I would argue that we never want to be a society that endorses taking one's life for those reasons.
Mr. Alejo, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Today I'm proud to rise as a joint author of this historic bill, ABX 215, the End of Life Option Act in California. This bill will undoubtedly be one of the most difficult issues that we'll be voting on this legislative session, and in fact, California is on the cusp of being only the second state to enact this through legislation rather than a ballot initiative or court decision. Vermont was the first just 2 years ago. And I understand this bill touches on what's most important in our own lives, our morals and our values, our religion, our deepest emotions and philosophies about life and death. But it's also about our family members that we care about the most, our loved ones. And this legislation is a solution to a reality that plagues individuals who have fought long and an arduous battle that seems to have no end. This bill will give those suffering from a terminal illness the option to end their suffering in a peaceful and dignified manner. And as a state, we should respect the wishes of those with a terminal illness who desire this option as a means to end their suffering peacefully and privately with their loved ones. And while this bill is about allowing the terminally ill to peacefully and end their suffering, there's also another piece to this legislation, and that is their loved ones. There's nothing more painful than watching someone suffer and feel helpless while their loved ones are in agonizing pain. But 2015 is the historic year to enact this legislation. Nearly 70% of Californians support it. Nearly 7% of Latinos support it. And that is because they know it's about respecting the choices of those we love the most. And we have included the safeguards in this bill. And we don't have to go on unfounded hypotheticals about potential abuse or misuse. We only have to look to the evidence of other states such as Oregon and others, where we have not seen any such evidence about the poor or the disabled or minorities being pressured to use this. There's no such evidence about this bill in those states. And we should also not allow this issue to go to the ballot, because then we're forfeiting our own decision making, the duties that we were sent here to do, the tough choices we have to make. If we do not send this bill to the governor today, we then just send it to the ballot. We should be making those decisions. And this bill is also crafted in a way that respects our own individual choice about our own end of life, but our own personal choices should not be then imposed on someone else when it comes to making their difficult choices. And today is about honoring those that have passed on, as well as those who have never stopped to have their voices be heard. We have had some courageous individuals like Brittany Menard, whose last wish was to see her own state, California, make this a reality for the people who are suffering the most. They are the people, the courageous people, who have humanized this issue and have helped shape public opinion in its favor. But we also know from those stories that no one should be forced to leave their families, to go to another state, to have their end-of-life options during the last days on this earth. It should also not be available to those who could afford to move to another state. And members, let's also remember why we're here. To serve that those who need the most help, to fight for the voiceless, to protect those who are most vulnerable, but also secure a future in California in which its residents do not have to face the pain and disparity in their end of life due to an illness that they cannot control. Many cannot understand this issue until you imagine that it's one of your constituents who are suffering, somebody who is in agonizing pain, whose pain management no longer seems to work, whose organs are no longer functioning, whose cancer perhaps has reached all parts of their body, and whose doctor already has diagnosed that they only have less than 6 months to live. But then imagine their children seeing their loved ones in so much pain and feeling powerless in being able to help them. But then imagine that that person is just not your constituent, but imagine that that's your father or your mother or your grandparent or your daughter. And then how would you feel about this issue? This issue does hit close to home, especially for me this year. My father is currently suffering from terminal bone cancer. And some of you might have remembered him when he was on the floor in 2012, when he led the prayer here on this floor for Cesar Chavez Day ceremony. He's a Vietnam veteran. He was a pastor of his church, and he gave up so much of throughout his life to help other people. In fact, when I got married 2.5 years ago, he couldn't even attend our wedding because he was in the VA had sent him to a hospital to get a bone marrow transplant that took 2 months. A few days after visiting him, he had lost so much weight, had lost all his hair. He was in a lot of pain. This was the man who worked hard his whole life, made an honest living, took care of his family. The guy that when we were kids, we all looked up to. He was a strong guy in our family. But now here he is fighting for his own life. And last March, he sat us down with all my brothers and sisters around him. And he had that conversation that you never want to have with your loved one about what happens when that time comes. What choices does he want? And I hope that none of you have to ever have that conversation, because you can't help but cry, and it hurts profoundly. But when that time comes, that's what was at this core of this bill, is about respecting his choices, respecting my father's choices. A guy who served his country, who served God faithfully, gave so much to so many others, and now he's asking us to respect his choices when that time comes. And that's why I say, for the sake of our loved ones, let's respect them enough to give them their own options, because they deserve at least that.
Thank you, Mr. Alejo. Ms. Gonzalez, you are recognized.
I rise in opposition to this bill, and this has been the toughest issue that I've had to deal with. And I would have told you 3 years ago, somebody had asked, where are you on this? And I'd say, I believe in medical freedom and choice, of course. Like so many people my colleague from Salinas and others, I experienced my mother dying in front of my eyes of bone cancer, breast cancer that then spread to her bones. And it was very, very hard. She was a nurse. She understood her options. And a once very strong, vibrant woman did slowly degenerate. And she lived for about the time that she was given. The doctors weren't wrong. She ended up passing away from Coumadin and a brain bleed. As often happens, you die from other causes. That experience and those discussions we had made me believe a different thing, though. The importance of healthcare. So when we're talking about choices, I really want people to have choices. And when I came to this body, the number one reason I wanted to come is to expand opportunities for healthcare in my district. I always said one of the reasons that we did so well is because my mom was a nurse and we always had insurance. And I know my community that's working class, very poor, don't have the same opportunities. So I asked, as my number one priority, sit on the health committee. And as I sat there, every single hearing, I realized that everything in our healthcare system is driven by costs. Everything. How do we lower the cost? And I also realized that people's ideas to lower the cost often disproportionately affect my district, right? Not everybody needs a doctor, apparently. But some of your districts will always have a doctor. Not everybody needs a hospital. There's no hospital in my district. Care is through community clinics. We have a large population who not only is uninsured, but uninsurable under the current law. We can't pass health care for all because it's too expensive. So I sat through that, and it was amazing because a couple months ago, there was a lot written about the health committee and their decisions not to support this bill. And I'm not going to stand up and say I'm not Catholic. I am. I think most people know that. I've never seen the decisions that I've made be addressed to my religion when I stand up for women's reproductive health. But suddenly there became this idea that if you were Latino in Southern California on the health committee and you didn't like this bill, it was because of your religion. Well, it may have been, as it was for me, because we represent a different constituency. One who, because of everything we've seen on the health committee and understand, one who we're afraid won't have real choices, that this is just an option. I've heard, everything's fine in Oregon. Well, first of all, I have studied this bill probably more than any that I've seen. We can't definitively say everything's fine in Oregon. There's just not a whole lot of data. But I do know this. There aren't a lot of communities like mine in Oregon. It's a different world. This is a serious issue. It's tough. I don't want to urge people to vote yes or no. It's very personal. But I think it's the type of decision that voters should have the right to. I've heard the 70% poll number over and over, and that might be true. But like me, 3 years ago, before I had to vote on it, I would have said, sure. And then you look at an issue, and you think about it, and you debate it, and you ask, what is going to actually be the consequences of this? You ask, why, if this bill is about pain, is there no need to be in pain when you take these pills? You ask, if this just suddenly says, if you're terminal, by the way, we all are, that we should be able to decide when to end your life. How do you tell a transgender teen, we've had 3 kill themselves in San Diego, that that's not the kind of pain we're talking about?
30
that
seconds.
Kind of pain you can live with. We want to value that life. Healthcare is about saving people. I just can't believe that this will actually provide choices for my community. I think we should let the people of California decide.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Ms. Burke, you are recognized from your desk.
I stand in strong support of this bill. I, too, represent a district that struggles with access to health care, and I, too, sit on the health committee. And, yes, a lot of the decisions we make are based on fiscal responsibility, but clearly that's not how we make all our decisions. I truly believe that each one of us deserves the right to make our choices, but somehow our fervent defense of individual health care ends with terminal diagnosis, and I don't understand that. Instead of allowing patients to make the choice that best fits their beliefs, their care needs, their wishes, we're tying their hands and forcing them to accept care on all of our terms or take drastic, even devastating action. And yes, there are 12% of the people who live longer. Unfortunately, I have not had that experience. As of my most recent experience was 2 months ago when my friend died a very painful death of ocular cancer. It shouldn't have been a luxury for him to have his friends and family surround him on his last days. And someone's only hope for a peaceful passing should not mean a morphine-induced coma in which your body is left to starve. People should have choices. And like my colleague from Lakewood said, I think that that's the root of what this means. Life matters. And what we all do here in this building prove that every day. What we do with our time truly matters on this earth. But how our life ends matters too. Endings matter. We can give dying Californians choices and compassion in their final days, and I strongly request you support this bill.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Mr. Patterson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise to oppose this bill and want to at least visit the procedural question. I know that there has been a ruling with respect to the fact that it's appropriate here. Allow me to disagree, but the departure from the standard approach of having a full, complete hearing before the full Assembly Health Committee really is a procedure that provides full opportunity for people with all of these various different points of view to have an opportunity in a period of time and with ample testimony and ample notification. This has deprived, in my judgment, the elderly and the disabled opponents the access to the full Assembly Health Committee hearing. And so I've concluded that this is the wrong place, and unfortunately, it is the wrong time, and it is being done essentially with a stacked deck. I think that does damage to this body and to its deliberative purposes, and I think that we should learn a lesson from that. This belongs in the regular session, not here, and even Governor Brown is troubled by this maneuver. Full hearing in a regular session allows other voices to be heard. These are the voices of hope and of love and of perseverance, of terminal illness survivors who have lived meaningful lives well beyond a doctor-assumed 6 months prognosis. One other point, I think the CMA taking a non-opposed position is not the same thing as supportive. And I do not believe that we can infer that doctors are universally in support. Members, they are not. The AMA is still opposed. Permission to read?
Without objection.
The AMA's opinion 2.211 states this: it is understandable, though tragic, that some patients in extreme duress, such as those suffering from a terminal, painful, debilitating illness, may come to decide that death is preferable to life. However, allowing physicians to participate in assisted suicide would cause more harm than good. Physician-assisted suicide is fundamentally incompatible with the physician's role as healer, would be difficult or impossible to control, and would pose serious societal risks. And that's from the AMA. Finally, it seems to me, members, this bill, with apparently well-intentioned support, does devalue and diminish the nobility of the healing arts. and the many new life-saving treatments medical research is discovering almost every day. And so for these concerns and others that have been so, I think, passionately presented here, I ask that you vote no on this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Bonta, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise today in support of AB 15. And I know that we've all given a lot of thought to this issue, and I, as chair of the Assembly Health Committee, as well as the chair of the Public Health Committee sitting in special session, spent a considerable amount of time preparing to hear the first version of this bill, SB 128, in the Assembly Health Committee, and then AB 15 in the special session. And we did hear that bill in special session. We had a robust discussion. We had proponents, opponents, experts on both sides. We heard comments from committee members, and we had questions asked by committee members and answered. So this has been through a strong policy discussion before hitting this floor. And through the process, I've worked with all the authors to ensure that this bill has strong protections in place for those who choose to avail themselves of this option, as well as for those who do not. And many of us have had the opportunity to meet with Dan Diaz, Brittany Maynard's husband. I've had that opportunity. I met with him one-on-one in my district where he lives. And as those of you who've met with him know, no one is more eloquent than he when talking about the need for this option, the comfort it brings to the dying, knowing they can choose to take the drug or not. For me, that's what this comes down to. It's about choice. It's about self-determination. We're all going to die. Some of us peacefully, some of us sadly, not so peacefully. For those few of us faced with the prospect of an agonizing death, in my view, it is only humane that, if possible, we have the option of a more graceful, dignified, and gentle death. To be able to say goodbye, tell our family and friends we love them, be spared the pain of suffering, and at the time of our choosing, close our eyes and die in peace. Members, the majority of Californians want that choice. I want Californians to have that choice. I urge your aye vote on this measure.
Mr. Jones Sawyer, you are recognized from your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I will be voting aye on this bill, and really in honor of my friend Michael Claypool, who I went to college with, who was my fraternity brother, who we would get drunk in the Kappa House and talk about whenever, if something happened to us where we had a debilitating disease, as college freshmen would do, we would say stupid things like, "Take me out." At the time, it was a joke, especially since I worked in the mortuary business at that time. I worked in the mortuary business for 10 years. I helped thousands of families deal with the pain of burying their loved ones. Later on, as we grew up, we had families. Michael was on a hit TV show, and one day he discovered he had stomach cancer. At the age of 40, I saw stomach cancer just tear him apart. He became a skeleton of his former self. And the one time that I did go to see him before he passed away, I remember hugging him and noticing, realizing there was really nothing there. That this disease had just taken everything out of him. I remember him looking back at me in those hollow eyes, and being in the mortuary business all those years, I knew that time was coming for him. But I also remember that time where we jokingly, foolishly, as kids, talked about taking someone else's life. But I also realized he didn't have that option. And I realized the reason we said stupid things like that, because there were no options for people who had terminal illness. I've dealt with thousands of families who've had to deal with this in the mortuary business. And I've heard these discussions over and over again about how much their loved ones suffered and how much they wish that they had an opportunity to make a decision like this. I can't say Michael would have chosen this end for him. He may have fought to the end. I just felt bad for him because he did not have this option. He did not have a way to end the pain. He did not have a way for his family to be able to move to that secondary position of taking your family member to the end of their useful life and being able to put them away in a manner that's dignified so that they can go ahead and get their lives together. You have no idea how many conversations I've heard from family members that have said he's or she's in a better place now than they were before, and that God is with them, and that they're in a place where they do not have to suffer anymore. And so that is why I'm voting aye on this, in memory of my best friend, someone I used to compete with Christmas lights every year, who had the biggest Christmas lights, someone that I loved dearly. And to this day, it's been excruciating painful for me that I couldn't do more for him. And so today, I will cast a vote for everyone, every Californian who's in that same position. I'm going to cast a vote for them to be able to have that choice.
Thank you, Ms. Jones-Sawyer. Ms. Grove, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this bill, and I know, like all of us on this floor, I bet there's not one person who doesn't have a personal story, like my colleague from San Bernardino or my colleague from Salinas, on both sides of this issue. But the bottom line is, let's get back to the bill itself. I know this is a very passionate, compassionate issue that we need to address. But the bill itself does not allow for a mental evaluation. It's not required. It leaves a patient vulnerable in the case of someone like Alzheimer's who can't make their own determination. It allows the family members to make that determination for them. When you look at the list of things that are associated with this bill, lethal medicine can only be given after a physician can predict within 6 months that they will die. You heard my colleague from San Bernardino show and express how people are living years and years after. I have a story here that was given to me. Jeanette Hall from Oregon. She was given 6 months to live, and she's been living for 12 years, and she says life is beautiful, and she has an amazing video. I want to address some of the issues that my colleagues raised from both sides of the argument about the issue with Oregon's healthcare system and how Oregon is the first one to implement this assisted suicide bill. Permission to read?
Without objection.
This is a report from Oregon. It says some terminally ill patients in Oregon who turned to their state for health care were denied treatment and offered doctor-assisted suicide instead, a proposal some experts have called chilling corruption of medical ethics. Since the spread of his prostate cancer, 53-year-old Randy Stroop of Dexter, Oregon, has been in the fight for his life, uninsured, like some of my colleagues from San Diego's constituents, and unable to pay for expensive chemotherapy without regular health care insurance. He applied for Oregon state-run health care plan for help. Lane Individual Practice Association, LIPA or LIPA, which administers the Oregon health care plan in Lane County, responded to Stroop's request with a letter saying the state would not cover Stroop's pricey treatment but would pay for the cost of the physician-assisted suicide pill. Stroop said it dropped his mouth to the floor. The letter has been sent to terminally ill patients throughout Oregon and follows the guidelines established. Oregon has issues. There is no way anyone on this floor can guarantee that abuses will not take place. If you have someone with Alzheimer's and you have a person that will benefit from that person dying, you can make that decision for them, and that's not right. If you look at the cost, my colleague from Nicholas raised an objection and asked for this floor to take a vote. And the chair ruled against him. And then we voted against the chair. We voted to suspend the rule or defer the rule of the chair. The thing is that this bill is only in, and the chair did make it germane. And the reason why this bill is germane is because it is about Medi-Cal cost. It is about the cost associated. If in Oregon you're not going to pay for somebody who's uninsured, you're not going to pay for their chemotherapy treatment that is highly expensive, but yet you're going to offer them an assisted suicide pill, then that very well may be germane and why this bill is being taken up on this floor right now. Because this special session is to address the cost savings and funding for Medi-Cal. So I believe that's why it's germane to this session. But to say that we're going to pass a bill and make history, like some people have gotten up and spoken about, to say that we're going to make history and we're going to allow these decisions to be made by people other than the individuals that are actually ending their lives, which I don't agree with in the first place. We all talked about pain. I heard my colleagues express personal concerns about pain of their loved ones. Well, I'm sorry, colleagues. Pain is a part of life, and so is joy and happiness and all the things that are associated with it. The hardships. My colleague from San Bernardino takes care of her husband that's in a wheelchair. Did she predetermine that in her marriage? Probably not. Has it been difficult? I would think so. Does she love him, adore him, and find that that's her role in life is to care for her husband? Yes. Would he probably want another life? Probably.
30 seconds.
But pain is a part of life. And this bill I submit to you is germane to this special extraordinary session because I think that people are looking for cost-cutting measures in the Medi-Cal program. And this is not a way to deal with cost-cutting measures. I ask you for a no vote.